Well, it's 3 o'clock now. We may as well get started. I'm sure we'll have a few more people along the way as they join in. Hopefully, they don't miss too much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nicholas Moran. You can call me Nick. I am the Client Success Team Manager here at BGL. And today we're going to be listening into the multiple changes screen in CAS 360 webinar. This is a part of our overall education week. It's the third or fourth one of the CAS 360 webinars so far. So thank you very much for joining today. We really appreciate the time that you've made. Before we get started, there are the standard housekeeping rules. All attendees today will be on listen only mode. Fortunately, you can still ask questions away. You can do so by clicking the Q&A window to open. And then from there, you can type your question into the Q&A box and click on send. I'll try and answer as many as I can throughout the session. Hopefully it doesn't interrupt my flow too much. Otherwise, we have a bunch of BGL employees who are sitting in the background, making sure that those questions are attended to. So if I don't get to it right away, just be sure to know that someone is looking after you and is going to be answering those queries. Today's session is being recorded, so it will be posted to our YouTube channel right after we complete the webinar. This means that if any of your colleagues have been unable to attend, or maybe you have some staff members that you feel as if, you know what, they could really benefit from watching this webinar today, we have set the link to that recording to our YouTube channel in the chat function there, so you can access that link accordingly. As mentioned before, this is a part of our grander education week for CAS 360. We can see we've already covered our document email templates, company registrations, and earlier today, our practice management. We've got a handful coming up. Some that I personally think are really exciting and could be really useful are the free-form documents. It's such a broad system that we have in CAS 360, and there's so many, I guess, options that you can develop with it. So I highly recommend checking that one out. Utilizing BGL ID for client verification. As we all know, the ID verification space is changing in Australia over the coming years, and it's definitely something to get ahead of the game on. Finally, we also have one of our newer softwares, BGL Smart Docs, that we're starting to integrate into our other softwares as well, such as CAS 360, and that webinar is going to cover that. I highly recommend registering for those webinars. Similarly, they'll be uploaded to the YouTube channel, but that link will also be posted in the channel if you would like to register for any further webinars that we're doing throughout the rest of the week. Although those are our topics for CAS 360, we're actually in the last week of our education weeks that we've done so far, namely with Simple Fund and Simple Invest 360. I hope that many of the participants here today have had the chance to watch those webinars or be a part of. So if you are a part of the suite, please do check them out if you haven't already. If you aren't using Simple Fund 360 or Simple Invest 360, we do highly recommend seeing if going to those webinars still, seeing what information there is and how that may potentially help out your business. The link to contacting our sales team will also be in the chat function, so be sure to check that out. Otherwise, let's jump into all things multiple changes. That's why we're really here. So today's agenda is going to cover what multiple changes are, the different types of multiple changes that you can create. There's a handful that we can do in CAS 360. We also have how to combine those changes together. So not only in the multiple screen, but also in the sense of the individual changes that we can also generate with that company. Finally, at the end of the webinar, I'll be staying here for another 10 to 15 minutes to answer any sort of queries that come up throughout. So feel free to answer some questions at the end. Otherwise, let's discuss at least some of the benefits of the multiple changes screen. How multiple changes work is it is basically reading your entity database within CAS 360. And so that when a record is updated within the system, it isn't going to update for a singular company or a singular contacts. It's going to update for that entity and thus any relationship that it has with any other company, trust, contact, transaction that might be in the CAS 360 software. So how this is going to benefit is you only have to create one transaction and multiple sort of, I guess, regulatory forms will be generated along the way, saving you a bunch of processing time. And it's a really useful way to keep track of and update those company records. It also syncs in with our practice management integrations. So we have a handful of practice management systems such as XPM, APS, and My Old Practice Manager that can all integrate into the system. And you'll find that when we're starting to use those integrations, that the multiple changes screen is actually going to be one of our more common and more frequent screens as we update those records in our practice management system and push them through to CAS 360. Let's jump into CAS now so we can actually see what we're looking at. Don't worry, we're not concluding just yet. So the multiple changes screen is located on the left-hand toolbar, just right in the middle under multiple. And when we select new change, we have a handful of changes that we can create. And they're categorized into three sort of sections. You have the company address changes that apply to any addresses related to those companies, the contact address changes, which are related to the individuals within your CAS 360 database and their address details changing and their name changing. And then finally, for the company related ones, we just have our officer change. The holding company is on the way. It's currently in development as we see, but you'll be sure to know when we release that in our next updates moving forward. Let's start with our registered address change. So when we select new change, we can select our company that this change is applying to. So if I type in here one of the companies that is in my database, and we can currently see where their registered address is. I imagine this could be quite useful for any of for your firms that you're a part of if you're ever moving and the registered address is changing. We can simply go to our new address tab and start to add that into the system. As you may be aware, any addresses that have been used in CAS 360 before can be selected from this dropdown. So I've typed in 123 and plenty of our addresses that we have already in the system are appearing. Otherwise, you can always add new addresses as you're processing to rather than, create that and slow you down. It's all kind of done in the one workflow. We can see any sort of addresses that we can search for. To save some time today, we might just select an existing address from the system. And sure, we're going to be moving to this Hyatt address here. We can see our resolution date being today, as well as any sort of requirements that need to be notified of in terms of, say, a registered address change, in terms of is the premises occupied by someone other than the company. And when we toggle this option on, our office occupier function will now display. Where the multiple changes gain a lot of their functionality and in terms of streamlining the process for you is in our next toggle section. It's in our options that we just have here. So we have the ability to apply this change to various other aspects of the CAS 360 license, such as, do we want to change the address for the ABC holding company in terms of the other addresses associated with it? If we toggle on yes, we can see our business and postal and meeting address are all being included as potential address changes that we'd also like to update. We might leave this one toggled off for now because I'm going to demonstrate it a bit later with the business. Also, we can see our apply the change to where company's registered address is the same. So if you have multiple companies that share this registered address that are moving at the same time, sure enough, they will be recognized by CAS 360. We can see we have the BGL Test Company and the Damien Company being recognized here. And we're going to toggle this as yes. We also want this address, our 1234 North Road, to be changed to 123 Chesterville Road to these two companies as well. Finally, it will also recognize if there are any other people that also have this address that have this same sort of change. When we click on proceed, sure enough, not only has one change been created, but three. And those three are for the three different companies that we had before. Our ABC holding company that we generated the change for, but the two other companies that happen to share that same address. When I go to my prepare forms icon, I can now see the form 484 being generated with our new address being added, as well as our director's minutes or resolution also being prepared for the attendees of that particular meeting to sign off on this change. Despite the fact we've only generated one change, we can also do multiple in this one transaction. And what I mean by that is this section here. We can see that two changes have already been applied to this company. And so what has happened is I've prepared prior to this meeting 2 changes in this company. We can see here that there was an appointment of a director, so an individual person was appointed, as well as there was a share transaction that was also created in this company. And we can see the respective dates for those transactions. Rather than preparing those separately, we can combine the 2 document packs together with this toggle. We select our prepare forms, and sure enough, all 3 changes are now being prepared in the same document pack. So when we go to our form 484, we can see that not only do I have a lot more pages, but all those transactions getting recognized on the left-hand side here. We can see that our director's minutes resolution has also been updated. This is going to contain that appointment of director, allotment of shares, and that registered office address change. And finally, our document pack itself that we're generating in CAS 360 has updated to include all the necessary forms that you may want to prepare with those sort of transactions. So sure enough, our share certificate for that shareholder transaction, the consent to act for the officer change. So not only are you creating 1 change, but you're addressing 3 of these changes, despite the fact you've only prepared 1 transaction. It's really handy to do. Moving on, we can also use multiple changes within the multiple changes screen itself. So I can prepare, say, a business address change, and it's going to simply include it with these other changes that we've already created thus far. So say we have our business address also being updated. We're going to select it once again for the ABC company, currently located in Tasmania, apparently. And we can now update this to say it's going to be moving to this Nepean Highway address instead. What we've recognized with that is that under same principle once again, having does this apply to any other parts of the company? And we could say, yes, it does. It's going to apply to the meeting address. And when this does so, that record is actually going to update in CAS 360 for you. It's important to recognize that the meeting address isn't something that is required for ASIC to know on the official regulatory forms, and thus this address is being updated of that entity, of that transaction, but this isn't necessarily going to be processed on the form per se. And that would be the case for any sort of transaction that ASIC doesn't need to know about, such as the meeting address. We can also see apply where the company's business address is the same. Sure enough, the BGL ID company does share this. We can select yes, and sure enough, as we saw before, this will now combine that change and add that to our transactions that we're creating in the multiple changes screen. The final aspect being our contacts that share this address. This could be for a scenario where it's maybe like a home business. So not only is the business going to be moving, but the individuals associated with that business are moving as well. So you can recognize, okay, these 4 individuals in my system currently have the 17 Arthur Street address, and they're going to be moving to this new address as well. So I can toggle this option on too, and what this will then do is create that relevant transaction for those 4 contacts in CAS 360. When I click on proceed here, it's actually going to give me a warning first. So what it's letting us know is that these addresses have been updated. Your contact entity for this entity, the George entity, and Renee here have all been updated to that new address. However, they are not required for any of the BGL, any of the regulatory forms by ASIC, and thus they're not going to present in this multiple changes screen. When I do so, we can now see the transaction for that business address has now been updated. We can see all the different companies that are being associated with, such as there's that BGL ID company, there's Doris for that change of address, the individual that's moving in this scenario. And for example, we can now see under our prepare forms, the different changes that are being generated for this particular company. With any sort of transactions that you create within the multiple changes screen, you can always adjust and edit them as you're going. So say, for example, this was a mistake. Doris isn't actually moving to this address. What we can do is we can simply go to options here and delete that transaction from the system. And sure enough, that's simply going to revert Doris's address of living back to what it was. You're not deleting any data. all you're doing is pretending as if the transaction was never created in the first place. Similarly, you don't necessarily have to delete the transaction. You can always edit these details. So maybe this was a mistake. It's not actually moving to this Nepean Highway address, and instead moving to a different one. I can, sure enough, just simply update that transaction right then and there. And it's only going to update for that particular company because that's the only transaction that I'm editing. You can do a bulk remove under our options up the top here, where we delete all our multi-change records, but I'll demonstrate how that works right at the end once we've generated a few different types of changes all combined together. Let's move on to the individualistic sort of changes. We have our contact changes, namely if a person is moving. Sure enough, I can select our contact address option. I might just select myself here, and we can select the new address that I am moving to. When I do so, we have that same sort of principle from beforehand with the business address recognizing the individuals with the same, but also this time for other individuals. So not only am I moving, but maybe Gordon is moving with me at the same time. I can toggle this option on, and sure enough, Gordon's address is also going to update with me. And there, once again, we have our toggle for the companies that share that address as well, that 213 Charman Road. When I proceed, we're generating quite a few more changes now. So what it does is it recognizes what relationship that individual entity has in CAS 360. So whether I'm a shareholder, a director and shareholder, and sure enough, if I scroll up to the top here, we can see Gordon here, he's a shareholder, and it's the only company that he's associated with in this scenario. And thus, this change is being generated with our 4 other changes. They've all been combined together. So if I were then to select our prepare forms option, we can now see 6 whole changes are being created with this transaction. And as we go, our 4A4 is updated, our director's minutes resolution is updated. All these changes are being recognized and combined together. Under our new change, once again, we then have our contact name options as well. So when I select this option here, let's just say instead of being called Nicholas Moran, let's say I do prefer being called Nick, so I'm going to permanently change my name to something like that. I can then adjust that in the system. I can change the name layout as well at the same time if it might be preferring a surname before the first name instead. We'll click on proceed, and sure enough, that transaction is once again created and added to our list of entities that need to be updated. One thing to note with any sort of individualistic changes is that they can be pushed through from our practice management integration system. To give you a bit of information as to what this actually looks like, I prepared something in our notification bell. So if you had, say, XPM already set up and integrated, you can have it set up to sync so that whenever you're updating something in XPM, that will update in CAS 360. What will happen is you will get a notification in the bell once you've created that transaction. Sure enough, we've created one in Xero here for Joshua Maurice, and we have our options. We can just save that, or we can prepare the forms for that. And this is where it's actually going to use the multiple changes screen. When I select prepare forms, sure enough, we see a very similar transaction as we have already with that contact address change. It recognizes once again the people and other contacts that may come along the way with that. But most importantly, you can't edit that name because it's locked to the XPM transaction. Just so you can see what it looks like, we proceed once again, and it's Joshua has now been added to our list of transactions that we'd like to create as they're associating with the different companies. And we're seeing those build up across the entire system for the Cody company, for the Brian company, for ABC Holding Company. So depending on what company and what relationship it has, you can prepare those forms. We'll finish up with the company changes and the officer change option. When I select this, and let's just say we're selecting Connie here, what the system is going to read is what position Connie has with the company and what you would like to update with that. So for example, if we were appointing Connie as a director to this company, and we wanted to appoint her to any company in our database, as of today, we can select next. And sure enough, it's going to bring up all the companies on my company list that she is currently not a director of. And I can select those companies that that is the case for. You also have the option to update the meeting status as you're going. So one in particular that might be handy is the chairperson status. This would mean that maybe Connie is going to be the main signatory when you're preparing, say, a resolution for the annual review, and Connie's going to be the sole signatory of that resolution. By adding her as the chairperson in this screen here, that means that when that annual review eventually comes in, your solvency resolution that you're having prepared, and if you've set it to only have one director signing, Connie is going to be the one that automatically appears as that signatory. So you've got different functionality with that meeting status along the way to be able to update that in the one transaction once again. Let's say, yes, we are. We're happy with Connie being our chairperson. And you know what? She's going to be the chairperson of these three companies. Sure enough, our transaction list is getting quite long, but it always keeps track for you how many companies you've done it for thus far, as well as all the different transactions that are linked together. I'll also demonstrate what it looks like to remove the director from a company and how this can potentially have issues. So if I type in Connie once again, we can, sure enough, see her as a director, but we're changing her status. Instead of appointed, she's actually resigning from some as well. That meeting status will move to non-attendee. And what this system is going to recognize is Connie is currently director of these two companies. So you don't even need to figure out which companies they are. The system will read that for you. You know what? She's taking her time on those ones as well. And we can update that all in the one go. Whether the potential issue may arise is if you create a change that clashes within itself. So for example, I've updated my moving address for the ABC company. And what I can do is undo under Nicholas Moran, and let's just say I was resigning as well. What I would do is under next, and if I select the ABC holding company, it's actually not going to let me prepare the form. We go to our prepare form option here. It says, warning, you have one validation error to solve. And what that validation error is saying is I can't notify ASIC of a change of address detail and the fact that I'm also being resigned as the director. Doesn't make sense. Why does ASIC need to know that? So the system will always recognize for you if there's any sort of error or clash of transactions that you're creating, meaning that you're not going to send out something to your clients that wouldn't make sense when sending it back to ASIC. A simple way to update this as well is all the transactions that you have created throughout your multiple changes have been saved on the left-hand side, and you can simply remove this as you're going. This is essentially the delete function that we recognized before, back in the multiple changes screen. So I click on remove, and sure enough, that validation error has now disappeared as there's no longer a clash of transactions, and I can now get ready to send this out to my clients with all these changes combined together. Finally, with all our new change options and our multiple changes that we can do together, we can delete all multi-change records. You know what? I've realized I've stuffed this up. I've done all these transactions, but none of them are actually correct. I can remove them all in one go. It is going to warn you prior to you doing so. The important thing to note is you're not actually deleting any previous data. All that's being removed is the transactions you created thus far, the address details of the companies and the individuals and their holdings within that company are all going to remain as if you never prepared those transactions in the first place. So it's important to note you're never losing data. It's just merely a aspect of the preparation. As you saw throughout as well, these multiple changes are really fast to create. This has been one of the shorter webinars, which is good to know that the multiple changes can be done swiftly, and it's one of the great features that we want to point out so that you can see how we can generate these changes nice and quick, and we can get those updates to those company details, only waiting on your clients to reply. It would be nice if they could get a bit faster with that, though. That's everything multiple changes. We really appreciate your time today, guys. What I'll do is, with our concluding remarks, we've covered our changes to the company details, our contact details, and combining those changes together. We really appreciate the time that you've made today to come and attend this webinar. It's been really great. I hope you've learned something. I saw a couple of questions in the Q&A box, so I hope that those have been answered. Otherwise, if you do have any sort of remaining queries, as alluded to at the start, you're more than welcome to stick around, ask a few questions, and we're more than happy to answer. Otherwise, we really hope you enjoy your afternoons wherever you are in the world, and thank you once again.